I'm Kimberly, and today we're going to talk about how to read comics. I'd like to hear from as many of you as possible during this session, so when I ask for a volunteer, please raise your hand in the participant window and be ready to turn on audio. I'll also tell you when we'll be using other Zoom tools. Comics can seem intimidating, but once you start reading, you'll find that reading comics is a lot like reading any other book. Different elements work together to tell a story, but in comics, much of that storytelling is done visually. This lesson will help you read visually, whether you're new to comics or already a fan, so you can see a comic, process how it's communicating information, and make your own interpretation. These days, comics are everywhere, on television, in theaters, and in the streets. More people read comics than ever, but they're not just about pop culture. They're also about reading information visually, so you're more aware of how images affect your reactions, whether on screen, online, in advertising, or in a comic book. In this lesson, we'll start with the basics. What are comics and how do they work? Then we'll explore how comics can communicate information visually. As you read images critically, think about how the presentation can change your reactions. First, a definition. Comics are a visual medium where text and images are put together in sequence to communicate information or produce a response in the reader. You can find more technical definitions, but for this lesson, I'm going to focus on three key elements: text and images in sequence. Before we get started, I want to establish a few things. First, because this lesson is about reading comics, I'm going to start with what's most often comfortable for beginners, reading text, and build from there. But not all comics contain text, so it is possible to have comics that are largely or exclusively told through images. Second, I'm focusing on American-style comics, not manga, so know that while there are similarities, some of what we'll be covering is different in other traditions. To help you get comfortable talking about comics, let's begin with some vocabulary. Each individual drawing is a panel, so you have 3 here, which acts as the basic unit of comics. Panels are often surrounded by a box or a frame, but they don't have to be. The space between panels is the gutter, which is important both visually and mentally, when you use your imagination to fill in the blanks between the images shown on the page. Because we're looking at American-style comics, panels are read from left to right and top to bottom, just like you'd read written English on the page. As you get into more complicated layouts, you'll find that the creators use lots of other visual cues to help guide you. You can also see another key element here, speech bubbles. Speech bubbles enclose dialogue and will have a tail that points to the character who is speaking. Now, we've identified several of the key structural elements at work in these comics. Can anyone see any other things at work here? Please raise your hand to share. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead?
I guess I can't point at it, but how the sound effects are used, like the one on the very top, it comes off the page. So you notice that, and it makes it more emphasis rather than like if it was in the back behind all like the light posts and things.
Excellent, thank you. Sound is one of the key things in comics. Although you're seeing everything visually, they will do a lot to try and make the scene come alive. So you have sound effects like that. You even have the lights over here so you can tell the cop cars are on. Another thing that you'll see to kind of make things come to life are motion lines, like you see down here with a bullet that will show you action and movement, which sometimes, like those, kind of even imply sounds. So those are excellent. Let's go on. As you continue, you can see how this bottom panel here expands past the limits of the frame. So this is still a panel, but when it expands past the limits of its frame like this, it's called a bleed. Bleeds are often used for big dramatic moments, like the cop being shot here. When a bleed goes all the way to all 4 edges of the page, or sometimes even across both pages, it's called a splash. Like a bleed, splashes are used for big reveals. And again, if you have trouble keeping the term straight, panel is the most important term to remember because these are all still panels. Splashes and bleeds are just more specific kinds of panels that carry a lot of dramatic weight. Noticing when things break out of their frames or take up more space on the page can really help you see what the creator wants you to focus on. Now, let's see how well you can identify the basic elements of comics that we've covered so far. On the next screen, you're going to see a 2-page spread. I'd like you to work together to identify the elements we've covered using your annotation tool. If your first name begins with A through J, use your text tool to label the first set of elements. If your name begins with K through Z, use the draw tool to mark the elements in the second section here, using the colors indicated. We'll take a few minutes for this. Good, so we've got speech bubbles appearing. And yes, the gutters are the parts between. Yes, these are all panels. Okay, so bleeds and splashes we don't have on here yet. And frames. Yeah, frames are those boxes around, so good job there. Okay. So as you see here, we've all got some of the basic elements. The gutters, although they're easiest to see in between things with boxes or frames, it actually can be all the things in between things. And yes, this full page over here, this is actually a splash, although it's also a bleed in a panel that goes all the way to the edge of that page. You can even have panels inset, like this one is here, inside of things. And those usually will either focus on a detail from that scene, or like in this case, kind of react to the scene that it's inset inside of. And another bleed down over here. So good job, everybody. Let me clear all of these. Hey, that worked this time. Okay. Okay, so now that you know the elements that make up a comic, let's look at how those elements are used to add meaning. We'll look at text first and see how it works together with the other elements to create meaning. Text can be used to convey more than just dialogue. Here, only one text element is used for speech. Captions, like you see across here, whether separated from the rest of the panel or written across it, can act as narrator, express a character's internal thoughts, or provide other context like setting or timestamps. Internal thoughts can also be shown using thought bubbles, which are a lot like speech bubbles with small circles leading to the character instead of a tail. But modern American comics don't seem to do that very much anymore, so most often you'll see that in captions like this. What about this other text shown here? Can I get a volunteer to share their thoughts on what that is? Just raise your hand in the participant window if you're. Tell us about that part here. Okay, Rose, why don't you go ahead and take the microphone and show us? Or tell us, I guess.
Okay, so the one in the second panel, correct? Or any of them?
It doesn't matter. They're the same ones.
So
I follow what you're talking about.
I don't know exactly if there's a specific term for them, but it looks like they're indicating music or singing or something, some kind of sound that's, I guess, kind of
Very
drifting
good.
somewhere.
Yes, we do have music, and that's where you can make things be whatever you want. You kind of have, with the tails here, you have the conventions of a speech bubble, but you also have music notes that you use a symbol to show you that this is music. So it's coming from many voices, but you can kind of see the music sweeping across them. My favorite here is this last panel where it seems like it's swelling over out of the paddy wagon, I guess, as they're driving away. So you can make text have graphic elements and use that visual language to add meaning to what the text says. So thank you. So here you can see the idea of applying visual effects to text taken to the extreme. The speech bubbles for each character are drawn differently using distinct shapes, colors, and even the way the text is written. The receptionist dialogue is drawn in traditional comic book style with uniform lettering, oval speech bubbles, and simple tails, so she comes across as completely normal when compared to the other two characters. Now I'd like you to each guess about the other two characters based on how their dialogue is drawn. In the chat box, I'd like each of you to share your impressions and what elements influenced you. If you already know this comic, focus on how the characters are shown through their dialogue rather than what you already know about them. So this will just be in the chat window. Anyone? Doesn't have to be fully thought out. Just a few words in the chat box to show what you would guess about this character here, or you can do about the bottom character there. So yes, I'm just asking like what your impression of these characters are, Heather, to get an idea. And you can have something like the other one, weird sounding and flighty. White text on black conveys darkness and mystery. So yeah, the colors of this one kind of making him seem dark and mysterious. Lindsay, the drippy outlines, very good. And yes, the daydreamy, I like that description. Droopy, okay, good job everybody. So just to give you an idea, you're all on the right track and you can get a lot out of how they're drawn. To give you a context for what this comic is, this is Dream, the Lord of Dreams and Nightmares, while his sister Delirium is a creature of madness and instability. So their speech bubbles can reflect their natures while also leaving it up to you to try and imagine how they might sound. Distinctive dialogue styles like this can also help to identify a character. In this series, Dream appears in many shapes and forms, but he's always identifiable by the white on black speech bubbles with their creeping edges. Okay, now let's look at an example of just how far past text dialogue can move. In this comic, the main character loses his hearing. So in this hospital scene here, the speech bubbles remain empty, so we can tell the other characters are talking, but not hear what is said. Elsewhere, the speech bubbles are painstakingly constructed of fragments and guesses as he tries to read lips, with ASL signs that he doesn't always understand. Okay, so for this next activity, think about the different ways that sound can be expressed visually. This could include how the text is written, how things are drawn, symbols, colors, fonts, or anything else you can imagine. So let's take a few minutes and we're going to fill up this screen together with some ideas for how you could represent the way that a robot sounds. You can use your text tool or even the draw tool if you'd like, and there are no wrong answers here. This is just a creative brainstorming activity. Beep boop. So yes, we've got some sound effects. That would be a very good way to do it. Yes, you could do them all in different sentences. That's great. Metallic, that's an interesting one. I'd have to figure out how to draw that one. But yes, you can have all sorts of different shaped text boxes. I like this here with the different ones. So just to get a few ideas. Static, that would be a good one. I've seen one comic where they did all of the dialogue for the robot was in binary, so it was just ones and zeros. So there's no limit to what you can do exactly to make things happen. Okay, so good job everybody. I'm gonna clear this and let's go on to our next one here. Oops. Okay, so next we're going to explore some of the ways that images can add meaning, such as colors, art styles, layout, or symbols. One of the most noticeable ways that image can affect meaning is through color and art style. Artists can select different color palettes, contrast levels, or levels of detail to create different moods. These deliberate choices help them tell different kinds of stories, so that comics can reflect a wide range of styles, as you see here. In this exercise, we'll explore how different styles can set the stage for different stories. I'm going to give you a brief description, and I'd like you to each pick the image that you think might match that story, using your check mark, which is underneath your draw tools, to vote. If you know a comic, please still vote, but think about why that art style might have been chosen over the other options. So you're just going to be drawing a check mark on the screen. So for the first one, it's a horror comic for middle school and high schoolers. Good, so I'm seeing a few, we're kind of all over the place on this one, but there's a couple different ones that are coming up with multiples. So this one would make sense for the monster, and the bright colors would work for kids. This one definitely has a dark feel. The correct answer for this one is actually this one down here. It's also based on fairy tales, which might have helped you a little further, but I didn't want to give it away completely. So let me clear these and let's try another one. So this one is a story where ancient deities are reborn as pop music stars. Well, that one, everybody, right away. So yes, this one is, that is correct. This one is a very pop art style. And that is the correct answer for that one. That's one of my favorite comics. Now let's clear it and try one more. For this next one, a memoir of the civil rights era. Okay. So in this one, I'm getting these two. We definitely think black and white is a common theme. And I actually probably should have picked a different image for this one that was a little more less dramatic shadows too. It is actually this one up here. But yes, that black and white definitely works for the civil rights era. You can portray a lot of those. Depending what image, I've also gotten a lot of this one, where being the other kind of realistic one. But think how the different art styles, what that story, I can't imagine a civil rights story told in this style. So good job, everyone. And I'm going to clear these. So as you can see, visual elements can be an effective tool for storytelling. I hope that this activity has helped you consider some of the reasons why comics creators might have for different artistic choices and how those choices can shape the resulting story. Before we move on, I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on your own reactions and preferences. Choose a few images that appeal to you and mark them with a check mark. If several speak to you, feel free to mark several options. Excellent. We've got some kind of all over the place. Okay. Oops. There are a wide range of styles, genres, stories, and content that is available to you. When you explore comics for yourself, it's okay to put down something that doesn't appeal to you. There are as many kinds of comics as there are kinds of stories, and there's plenty of room to explore. And this will show you which ones those are from if you are curious. Comics also use visual elements to focus your attention. In this panel, the creator uses color and image clarity to focus attention here at the center, while the background drops into black and white static. The circle inset at the middle grabs your attention, while the perfectly round speech bubbles lined up just underneath lead you down into the dialogue. Here, all of the visual techniques are working together to add drama to the moment, which is when Lucifer leans in to ask for a favor. Layout choices can also affect how you perceive the story. Try to imagine this as a single image instead of as a sequence of panels. How would you perceive it differently? I was going to have someone volunteer, but I think for time's sake, I'm going to go over a few different things. So some of the common things that people see in this is kind of the movement of time, that breaking it up can spread it across. There's also this connection between things. Also, like a movie camera panning across the space, you can get that movement as well. And one of my favorite interpretations, by doing it in two different panels, it can kind of also create a bit of cause and effect. So the blood dripping off of his hands, and then as it hits the ground, blooming into flowers. So any of those are possible. So as you've seen, comics can carry a lot of information visually, sometimes without needing words at all. For our last activity, we're going to look at a comic spread that relies entirely on images to communicate. So see how much you can work out about what's happening. Again, we're going to use the chat box for this activity again, so share your thoughts in the chat box and feel free to ask questions, build off of each other's ideas, or make guesses. So, and I'll ask some questions to help get you started. So what do you think this dog is doing here? All right, so he's sniffing around the dumpsters and he's getting all sorts of interesting scents off of the things here. So does anyone have a guess? One of these people, you can pick any column, which ones Yes, pizza is most interesting, looking for different things. That's got his exclamation mark, and of course is the one they're doing. This dog is actually usually referred to in this comic as Pizza Dog because that is one of his primary motivations. You can also guess a little bit about each person. So like here is an artist with his pencil shavings. And yes, then at the end, he hears something and then it goes on to the next thing and you're processing sound there. So those are all very good. Okay, so thanks for attending today's workshop in reading comics. I hope that you've enjoyed this look at how comics can use words and images together to create meaning and feel a little more confident in reading comics yourself. Whatever your taste, whatever kinds of stories you're interested in, there's a comic out there somewhere for you. If you're ready for the next step, I've gathered some resources here to help you get started. For more about comics theory and how comics work, I recommend the book Understanding Comics, which is where a lot of the concepts from this presentation came from. For beginning reading suggestions, you can try Comic Book Herald's list of recommendations or check out my personal picks at the bottom link. And I'll be putting those into the chat box and as we go on here. So thank you for participating.